That group of men did what any group of men would do. They didn't want to leave, as in they wanted literally to stay forever. And why should they crave the descent? When you're served up some kind of divine bodily experience of what mountaintop life looks like, well, it makes life down the mountain reek, with views that have turned from the grandeur of fresh possibilities to the stench of life on the pavement, where brokenness does reside and thieves break in and steal. Peter, James, and John were allowed the inward glimpse, and I suppose that's all it was. But it was enough to mess with their desires to stop time and let it ride until forever kicks in. Jesus had taken the three men to higher ground, literally and spiritually. Matthew 17 says it this way. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and he led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter was the master of picking his moment. He had a history of it. And now Peter has an idea and he makes the pitch. You know, there was resolve in his eyes. There had to be. And there was resolve in his voice. You can just hear it. All he needed was the green light from Jesus and construction would commence. Peter was a decision maker. And I suppose that's one of the many reasons I find him magnetic. Peter held a bias for action. Peter was a man that Roosevelt would have been proud of for being a man never abiding in the arena with those cold and timid souls who were merely commentators on life instead of those that engaged it. And so he says to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. In other words, let's stay. But they had to make the descent, and Jesus knew it. The purpose for which Jesus walked among us was down the mountain, not on its summit. Life in the here and now happened down the mountain, not on top of it. And that's where our purpose is too, for no servant is greater than his master. Life work is to be done in the trenches, where mud is more common than carpet. In the less than stellar cultures where fatigue and disgust exist, where spiritual forces malign the attempts of those choosing to be what John called a kingdom of priests in Revelation chapter 1. The mission's down the mountain, where revenue gets thin and revenue strategy seems even thinner, where a daughter cries because a boy broke her heart, where sworn friends turn out to be people who were never really friends at all, where wives choose another man, where parents get old and bodies once strong become weak and compromised. That is why they had to come down the mountain. They must come down the mountain so that the kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven. Oswald Chambers once said, it is the simple, dreary day with its commonplace duties and people that smothers the burning heart, unless we have learned the secret of abiding in Jesus. Abiding is about presence, not pace, and Chambers seems to hone in on it. Perhaps that is why Jesus showed Peter, James, and John the reality of what was coming later, and it would have to wait for later. The simple, dreary day does in fact war against mountaintop life. The dry seasons do in fact rage against the fresh fire of the mountaintop. It is in those arid seasons where grit becomes the path to godliness and resolve the main ingredient for righteousness. Let us never forget, my brother, that any man can worship on the mountain. Retail Christianity, which seems to rule the modern day Christian life, thrives on providing mountaintop Sunday experiences to the spectator, and it rarely asks for much else in return. Down the mountain, at the base, where the view is limited and the air is foggy, just look around and you'll see that there's plenty of seats available when resilience is required to worship. A man survives the dreary day by the supernatural stamina often injected into his marrow when on the mountain. That's what those high-altitude moments do. They inject us with glimpses of what is to come so that we can survive what is happening now. Sometimes being a missionary doesn't mean going to a foreign country. It can just mean sending some truth to somebody in your world that needs it. Hey, you can share the Man Minute. You don't have to post it on everything or go to your Facebook page and splatter it all to the world. Think through a list of friends. Somebody come to mind that needs to hear or read what was said, send it to them. You might just be amazed at how far it can go.